Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice. Hello, this is James, and the Mad in America podcast this week is sponsored by Drs. Rani and Suraj Holistic Psychiatry and Mental Health Coaching. Are you ready to make a lasting change in your life beyond diagnosis? Then join Dr. Rani Bora's 12-month group coaching program named Beyond Diagnosis. Get access to one-on-one and group coaching sessions with her, tailored resources, simple but powerful practices to shift your state of being, peer support, and so much more. This unique program starts this March 2023, so don't wait any longer. Start your transformation journey today and unlock your full well-being potential. To find out more, you can visit their website, which is drsranisuraj.com, and I'll spell that for you. It's DRSRANISURAJ.com. And there you'll be able to find more information and join this unique program. Okay, and now on to our interview.
On November 30th, the New Haven Register reported that a group of Yale University students and alumni filed a federal lawsuit against the university seeking to remedy current policies and practices around students with mental health disabilities. The move follows an investigation by the Washington Post on the school's policy of forcing leaves of absence on students believed to be suicidal. This problem is not unique to Yale. Both a lack of access to appropriate on-campus mental health supports and discrimination against students struggling with their mental health are all too common at American high schools and colleges, according to our guest, Stefanie Lyn Kaufman-Mthimkhulu, founder and director of the nonprofit Project Let's. Project Let's, which stands for Let's Erase the Stigma, is a national grassroots organization and movement focused on creating innovative peer-led alternatives to our current mental health system, including peer support and community care, political advocacy, organizing, and mutual aid. It is now active on about 30 college and high school campuses across the country. Stefanie Lyn Kaufman-Mthimkhulu is a 2017 graduate of Brown University with a degree in medical anthropology and contemplative studies, and was a 2018 Fulbright Scholar. They describe themselves as a white, queer, and non-binary, disabled, neurodivergent care worker who shows up for their communities as a disability justice and mad liberation educator and organizer, parent, doula, peer supporter, writer, and conflict intervention facilitator. Stefanie sits on the Lived Experience Advisory Council for the Psychiatric Services Academic Journal and serves on the board of directors for the Institute for the Development of Human Arts. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Miranda. Happy to be here.
So let's get started. When, why, and how did Project Let's get started?
Back in 2009, I was a freshman in high school on Long Island and in New York. And I lost a friend to suicide that October of my freshman year of high school. And it was a very traumatic death and situation, and it was handled extremely poorly by our school district. This was back in 2009, but essentially no supports were offered. I remember, students who were identified as knowing her were allowed to leave class, and our parents could come pick us up. But that was about it. I remember sitting around a table with a bunch of other students who were effectively in shock, with guidance counselors, educators around us, and nobody saying a word. And that was the trajectory that followed following her death. And her name was Brittany Marie Petroka. And, there was just no conversations about it. And beyond that, there was an intentional effort to dissuade students from talking about her life, talking about her death, talking about the ways that we felt, we were not being supported, by the people around us who claimed to be the experts, the ones that we were supposed to turn to. So that was the major reason that I started doing this work informally in 2010. I was also coming to terms with my own lived experience of, at the time, what I described as mental illness. And I entered the mental health system around the same time. I was also deeply impacted by my friend's death, and that really brought me into the mental health system. But also, I knew that there were borders and boundaries to what I could or should say. And many of the folks around me, my friends, my peers, we were supporting each other through things that I think the adults around us thought, we had no knowledge of, or, we weren't ninth grade, maybe navigating things like sexual violence or self-injury or eating disorders, but we were, and we knew intrinsically that it was not safe to talk to the adults around us. We knew what would happen. And there was nobody supporting us in obtaining these skills. I remember having a health class in high school where I think we effectively talked about, depression is if you're sad for 2 weeks or more, and anorexia is when you don't eat. And I think that was about it. So there was just no education happening really. And still that overwhelming belief that if we talked about these things, we were going to be putting tools into people's hands, giving them ideas that they, didn't already know about. So it was better to just, ignore and hope that people weren't affected by it. So I began doing a lot of just one-on-one peer support work. I was connected with some Girl Scouts communities, and I began just sharing some of my experiences, and really found it to be so important to have community spaces. After Brittany's death, her mother was very intentional about having a memorial space and community, and brought folks together every year, for a fundraising event, and, having that consistent, reason to come back together for a person who's no longer here really taught me the importance of ritual. And I think we know that, with death in general, but with suicide or things connected to mental health or mental illness or disability, there's often so much shame there. So that was really when I got started doing work with Project Let's.
Okay, so then after you graduated from high school, you attended Brown University. Besides difficulty in accessing services, what kind of challenges and problems did you and your fellow students encounter with the system of care on and around campus for mental health crises?
I'll say that, very early into my time at Brown, I took myself off of all of my psychiatric medication. I didn't want to be on them anymore. Um, I had felt like I was going to my psychiatrist and asking to come off of them. And then I would leave the appointment like on a higher dose and another medication. And I didn't know how that kept happening. And I just decided like I was done. And I don't recommend anyone ever doing this, but I just cold turkey stopped everything. And I obviously went into withdrawal, and I was very sick. And this was about my second week of classes as a freshman. And I decided, like, let's try and start on a transparent note. I remember emailing my professors saying, I was withdrawing from some medications, and I was going to be doing some work virtually. And then I would be in class probably within the next week or so. And a day later, I got an email from what at the time was called Student Support Services, something to the effect of, one of your professors informed us that, you are not doing so well. We'd love to offer you some support and resources. Please come in for a meeting. And I was, a freshman, naive. I was like, wow, they want to offer me some support. That's great. And I remember showing up in this office, and immediately I could tell by the tone and the environment that like that was not the kind of meeting it was going to be. And, the conversation just went along with her being like, there are many students who come here who have like existing mental health issues, and they realize within the first couple of weeks that they just absolutely could not handle it. So if you want to, go home, if you want to take a leave, I can help you with the paperwork. And she mentioned at the time I had a diagnosis of OCD, and she mentioned my diagnosis. And that for me, that moment I bring up because it was a huge activation point of like my experiences with paranoia, because I was like, why does she have access to that information? I don't believe that I said it. And I don't think, that should be, that's in my health records. Like, why is that? Why does she know that? So, that for me, that meeting actually triggered, what we could call like an extended psychotic episode or altered states, where I just like went back to my dorm and started like deep dive researching all of these things that we're talking about today, these policies, how universities have, historically been involved in, surveilling students in all of these different ways. I became really frightened that I was going to be kicked out of town, and understood very early on that it was not safe for me to be honest and open with this university about my experiences. And I never was. I never saw a counselor at the counseling center. I navigated it in different ways. So I just kind of want to set that foundation. And I think from there, I started connecting with a lot of other students and hearing and learning more. We had folks who were being forced to go to health services and get weighed regularly because they were identified to have eating disorders. And this is not just at Brown. This was, and that's not necessarily current policy. This was at the time. Thinking about the difficulty with accessing academic accommodations, the repetitive disclosure, the fact that even if you have accommodations that are approved by disability services, the decision still lies within each individual professor. If they're going to approve that, what it's going to look like in that classroom, do you need to share more information? That's like a full-time job. Thinking about the fact that there's, virtually no accountability for so much of what's happening, because you have students who are already being targeted and discriminated against and oppressed, and we're exhausted, and we're students. That's why when I'm thinking about even what's happening with these lawsuits, even if it's just a couple of students being represented within them, I know just even from my own direct experience, hundreds and hundreds of students whose, names or stories will never be known. These are daily, every single day occurrences. It's not something that is out there to be experiencing these things because of the design of these institutions. When we're really thinking about the ways that we are, seen as and treated as liabilities. So I think we see that as well with, I've had students from different universities receiving disciplinary action notices for having panic attacks in like public spaces or engaging in self-injury, being like literally penalized for those things. I think another thing we don't necessarily think about as much, but is really painful and ingrained, is the ableism that happens within the educational curriculum itself. Thinking about like abnormal psychiatry classes or abnormal psychology, right? Just even the framing that there is such an abnormal psychology, and just recognizing that, even trying to be in classrooms where this content is being taught, you have to be prepared at any moment to like defend your humanity in ways that should not be happening. Other things that we saw were like behavioral health contracts, forcing essentially students to engage in certain types of therapy or certain types of care or a certain number of sessions per week or month in order to remain on campus. I saw a lot of students who were struggling with their academics due to mental health issues or disability, who were essentially, quote, given the choice between an academic suspension or a, again, quote, voluntary medical leave, which is not voluntary, that's coerced. But many students didn't want the label of an academic suspension, so they would choose that medical leave. And even looking across the board at different universities and the standards that they have for what students have to do when they're on a medical leave, whether it's voluntary or forced, showing that they're working, showing that they're getting treatment. Sometimes they have to, take other educational classes in the meantime before coming back. And essentially doing like reapplication processes to get back into the schools that they've already been accepted to. And in our society, being accepted to college is a big deal for so many people that defines like pretty much like 18 years of work. If that's what you've been working towards, it could be a part of your identity, something that's connected to our families, and where we're getting housing, where we're getting food, where we have community. So the threat of risking that and leaving that, and maybe going back to environments where we don't have access to the same resources or community, is something that keeps many students from not accessing care. And the last thing I'll say is that, the majority, if not all, of college counseling centers are, operating from very short-term therapy models that are almost always rooted in talk therapy, which is just not really accessible to many students who have like chronic or ongoing or more intensive experiences that are outside of like general mental health and wellness. And we see the lack of options for other students experiencing mental health crises, who often are met with police intervention within their dorm rooms, anywhere on campus, and taken to hospitals, which is another thing, involuntary hospitalization that happens frequently on campus. So lots of different, I think, buckets of issues that are all connected to the fact that we are viewed as liabilities, as burdens in these spaces, and it takes a significant amount of work, of effort, resources, privilege to be able to like maintain our presence in these spaces.
Yeah, got it. So I guess that was about the point you started a Project Let's on your campus and created the Peer Mental Health Advocate Program.
Yeah, so I was doing work with Project Let's before I got to Brown, and I never necessarily intended for it to grow into the organization that it has grown into. I think this was just the work that I felt was necessary. And we just we just kept moving and doing, and it shifted and changed over time. And I think some of those things that I saw in my high school experience were just, amplified 10, 15 fold at Brown. And I think, when I got there, I was probably, definitely a little more like trusting of certain administrators, and perhaps like the will to actually make changes structurally, which a lot of student organizers have that hope and that faith and that belief. So I did spend about a year meeting with administrators and proposing essentially this kind of peer program, but that it was built into the university, because I thought it would be more sustainable that way, and wanting to have this stamp of approval from all of these people who were connected to mental health on campus. And we went back and forth for many, many, many months, and eventually we were told that the university believed it was too risky to engage in a program like this, and they didn't want to do it. And at that point, I kind of asked myself, like, okay, am I doing anything illegal? Like, I don't think so. Like, we're going to do this program. And I remember sending out a message on to our like university's daily newsletter, basically being like, we are going to be starting this peer support training. It's going to be like, I don't remember what it was at the time, 4 or 6 or 8 sessions. And we had, for the first cohort, like 60 students register for this training. And I built the curriculum from a lot of different lenses and angles, but really looking at the certified peer recovery specialist curriculums and seeing the gaps that existed there, and wanting to make something that was really specific to a student experience, that was really culturally and trauma responsive, that considered social, political, and economic factors as core parts of what we experience, that's moving away from a biomedical model and centering, different experiences. So designed that first version of the curriculum, and we trained like between 50 and 60 students in that first cohort. Not everyone became PMHAs or peer mental health advocates, but I think it just shows that it was something that was desired. And that was an important moment as well for me to recognize that we sometimes we just need to stop talking and do something.
So tell me a little more about what the peer mental health advocate does to help their fellow students.
I think, well, first of all, one thing I'll say is that our peer support program is a little bit different in terms of that everyone has lived experience. Many college campuses have peer support programs that anyone can join and be part of. And I think, we end up seeing a lot of folks who want to be therapists or want to be social workers who, feel really bad for mentally ill people and are coming from, ideologies and perspectives that are not of like equality and minimizing those power dynamics. So for us, it was really important that everyone is identifying as being part of our communities in some capacity, and these are students who kind of go through this training that's like skills based and political education based, and coming out of it, supporting folks, I think, in a more traditional capacity of what you might imagine, maybe like regular sessions. Folks might meet weekly or bi-weekly, in person, virtually, might be texting throughout the week, depending on, the container of the relationship and the boundaries that are set within it. So some kind of element of consistent like checking in and support spaces. A lot of our PMHAs do rapid crisis response, both for like peers that they are assigned to and working with regularly, and in general when we are called in and asked to show up in a space. And that can look many different ways. We'll often go with students to meetings or appointments, or students who have a lot of concerns or fears around their disability services appointment. We will go with them and move through that together. We'll make calls for people, do the like logistical labor that comes along with our identities. Does my insurance cover this? Which provider can I see? Helping people actually navigate systems, which is so incredibly supportive. I think, giving people options for what many of our students get matched with someone who shares aspects of their identity, their lived experience, and having a connection in that way where you see yourself reflected and there's different possibilities than where you're currently standing, I think is so critically important. And our students know that we are not connected to the university in terms of we don't share information with the university. We don't report things to the university. We're not mandated reporters in that capacity. And so there's a level of safety and trust that we're able to build with students that, I don't think could ever be present within the mental health system as it stands.
You wrote a report that was able to quantify the positive effect of Project Let's Work. What are some of the highlights?
So really thinking for us, we had sent out surveys. We were taking pre-evaluations from folks who were using our peer support program and doing evaluations at a 6-month point, and following up with folks to really take a look at, what is the effect of this program. So we definitely had a lot of qualitative responses and stories and experiences to share that are so hard to quantify, but particularly in terms of, is this type of peer support working? We saw, really significant increases from this cohort of students' data that we were looking at in terms of actually putting different coping skills into action, feeling more comfortable navigating systems and services on campus, feeling more prepared to navigate a crisis that arises for themselves or a community member. And nearly everyone that we had worked with who, filled out this evaluation form, had built a very robust crisis and safety plan with their PMHA. For us, it's really important to have access to a crisis and safety plan for everyone so that if and when things happen, we can make decisions that are most in alignment with somebody's values, with what they chose for themselves. I have many conversations and narratives of folks that I've worked with, folks that have been supported through our program who, talk about the fact that they would have never graduated without the support of their PMHA. We've had people who wrote letters of support while students were on medical leave and helped, their peers, get back into university, supported them, while they were on medical leave, and the university essentially, forgot about them. I know at Brown and many other places, if you're on medical leave, you can't be part of student groups. You can't access, the gym or the dining halls. You essentially can't really be around campus, which is such an isolating experience for folks who've just built new friendships or relationships. So thinking about all of those small things that allow us to keep moving forward, someone believing in us.
Let's talk a little about the campus chapters. You said there are about 30 now, mostly at colleges and a few at high schools. What are some of them up to, and what are some of their successes or challenges?
Yeah, I think, again, different chapters are doing different things. We have some folks doing, survival work. I think, especially since COVID, a lot of our chapters have been looking more inward at how do we sustain and support the folks who are, showing up here, who are part of this community, rather than maybe necessarily thinking of like, okay, what are the panels we can put on? What is the education that we can do? Not always. I think there are some places that, folks are needing more of that internal support with each other. Thinking about grief work, I know that some of our chapters have done regular and continue to hold regular spaces for, students to think through, move through, process their grief, continuing with peer support, thinking about organizing for policy change has been a really huge thing on all of our campuses. That happens in different ways and to different degrees. At Brown, for example, when I was at Brown, we were involved in a lot of direct policy change. I think at the time I was there, if I'm remembering correctly, students had it was between 3 and 5 sessions at the counseling center for the entire year. There were so many, very specific policies that we wanted to either get rid of or address. And that was a big focus. And I think now it's been really great to see how chapters are continuing that work. I think, challenges are always that, we are the directly impacted people. All of us are coming to this space having some kind of connection to madness, mental illness, disability, trauma, neurodivergence. We are often used to being the only one or one of a few who hold these identities in our classrooms or our larger communities, or we're coming from families where, we were the odd man out, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about just what happens when we put a bunch of people who have experienced similar and totally different types of trauma and harms and have different beliefs about, what causes these things, what is the root of it, what should we be focusing on. I think sometimes chapters may be more rooted in approaching things from a place where we are really rooted, which is a radical orientation. That's not just saying like, we need to increase access to the mental health system. Like, we are questioning, like, why does this mental health system exist in this way? And what are the potentials for harm once we get people through the door? And what can we be doing differently? So, thinking about how our chapters have done that, right, through building these alternative resource systems where students can go to and access care in a different way has been really amazing to see, despite those challenges that do arise.
How can students start a new chapter on their campus?
So we have an application that is always rolling on our website. And we have regular orientations throughout the year where folks will receive some training, some introduction to the work that we do, and a kind of support system put in place, for folks. And, we have a lot of flexibility. Again, there are folks who are coming to us with really specific issues on their campuses that they want to address, and some folks who are looking for, more structure. And that's the beauty of running an organization from a disability justice and a mad liberation lens, that we have the ability to be flexible in that way and really value the contributions that people bring to the table and the different ways that they see and want to do the work. So, folks can apply at any time. And we basically support students and chapters in achieving the goals that they set, and supporting them in moving through the challenges that exist in getting that done on their campuses, and organizing and navigating intense dynamics with administrators, and in accessing funding. Some students have never facilitated a space before. So we do a lot of leadership development work, helping folks create anti-oppressive spaces where we're not replicating the same types of harm that exists within the mental health system or within society. So that's a bit about, how folks can get started. We're doing a PMHA training cohort in January. So again, these things are happening throughout the year, and really welcome folks who are interested in this kind of perspective and this work to reach out with questions or to get involved.
Finally, the family connection. Is Project Let's initiative something that young people's or anyone's family members can get involved with in terms of gaining support or giving support to their loved one or to the organization?
Yeah, so I would say that at the moment, in terms of getting involved in, the chapter related work that we've been talking about, that tends to lend itself more on the youth side. But we absolutely have opportunities, and are interested in both working with anyone who wants to work with us in terms of, supporting our initiatives, and then also receiving services. So, something we've done with families and we're really excited about is, doing almost like mediation work with families, right? So something that we've seen be really, can put a real barrier in families is, something I experienced, where you have a parent maybe calling 911 for their child who's in a mental health crisis. And we had something recently like that, or we get requests like this fairly frequently, where folks are asking us to kind of come in and help repair harm that's happened within the family. So we might meet with, the person who was hospitalized, and then meet with the family members, and kind of do some separate work to reflect on and process, and then, bring folks back together, which, for folks who know about transformative justice and community accountability processes, very similar, and rooted very heavily in those frameworks and foundations of, wanting to have space for folks to take accountability for harm that's happened, while recognizing that these things are really nuanced. And we want to move to a place of growth, so that the next time a crisis happens, we move through it in a different way. So this has been one of my favorite parts of, like, the more direct service work that I do and have continued to do, that I've done and continue to do. And so, yeah, many different ways to get involved if you're interested. I recommend reaching out to us at info@projectlets.org.
Great. Any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Oh my goodness. Final thoughts. I'm really appreciative for the space to have this conversation today. I think I want to say that, one thing I want to caution us around is not forgetting our history and not forgetting, the fact that we collectively as a society have a very, very short-term memory. And it's painful for me as someone who, even just experienced college a few years ago, to be seeing some of the news and the way that folks are talking about, even the new lawsuits, right? As if these things are brand new information. And I recognize that for some people, right, it will always be brand new information. But recognizing that just because something is new to you doesn't mean that it is new. These are things that are not just even new within the last decade or 2 decades. These are things that have very, very long histories, which is why I personally think it's important, to recognize our community members as like a politically oppressed class that has a very specific history of oppression within dominant society. And I don't see enough of those connections being made when we have these conversations. It's almost like, well, Yale is discriminating against these students out of thin air. Where does it come from? I want to see more attention to the history and the lineages of where these issues are rooted, so that we can move forward collectively, and have our histories recognized without repeating these cycles, that harm our community members. And I think we have a lot of options and opportunities to do that. And I'm really excited to see some of the organizing and the momentum, especially within abolitionist organizing spaces, that's happening on this front. So yeah, thank you so much again for the conversation, Miranda.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our guest has been Stefanie Lyn Kaufman-Mthimkhulu, who is the Executive Director of Project Let's. I'm Miranda Spencer, and this has been Mad in the Family.
So thank you for listening, and a reminder that we're sponsored this week by Drs. Rani and Suraj, Holistic Psychiatry and Mental Health Coaching. Their unique 12-month coaching program named Beyond Diagnosis starts this March 2023. So to find out more about the program and to sign up, visit the website drsranisuraj.com, where you'll be able to find out more and get in touch with Rani. So, as always, thank you for listening, and until next time, take care. Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. Visit madinamerica.com for more news, views, and updates.